What if I told you that you were unknowingly in a cult? Or if not in a cult, then at least under undue influence? The truth is, I think that we all are, but we're not really aware of it. I'm Tristan Harris and co-host of Your Undivided Attention, the podcast you're about to hear. And on this episode, we are interviewing Dr. Stephen Hassan, an ex-member of the cult of the Moonies, who's an expert in brainwashing, cult indoctrination, and unethical hypnosis. You can watch the second half of this episode by heading over to the Center for Humane Technology's YouTube channel, and you can see a link to that in the description below. Dr. Stephen Hassan, welcome to Your Undivided Attention.
Thank you, Tristan and Asa. It's a real honor to be with you today.
Well, it's a real honor for us too, because back when we launched this podcast, Your Undivided Attention, in June 2019, we actually promised our listeners that we would be talking to cult deprogramming experts. And we failed to deliver on that promise until today, 2.5 years approximately later. And the reason actually that this was always in our agenda to talk about cult deprogramming is actually that there's so many dynamics of the way that social media works that mirror some of the social manipulative processes that occur in cults. And many listeners actually may not know this. And Steve, I don't know if you knew this, but I actually spent about 3 years going kind of touring different cults from the outside, going to large group awareness trainings, going into different groups. I had many friends in the Bay Area who were part of and participating in various New Age cults. Asa would hear of my stories when I would talk about these various groups I would join. And Steve, the thing I'm so excited to get into with you is that people really underestimate the degree to which psychological influence can work in an invisible way, regardless of intelligence, regardless of PhD level. In fact, there's many of the ways that social media acts like a cult factory. It identifies these buckets of human behavior that are similar. The people who are clicking on flat earth videos, or the people who are clicking on, various political tribe videos, and then pulling you deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. And so what we're really excited to just speak with you about today is the dynamics of how cults work, and then we'll get hopefully all the way into a conversation about the techniques of cult deprogramming, because I think if there's any discipline that is most needed right now to reverse our way out of the mind warp of the last 10 years of psychological derangement, it's the discipline of cult deprogramming. So we're just incredibly excited to talk to you today about everything you've got to offer.
Thank you. And ultimately, I believe if you're an adult, you should be in control of your own mind and not turning over your power, getting rid of your conscience, your critical thinking, and having blind faith and having certainty that your doctrine is the truth with a capital T, no matter what it is.
Yeah, and maybe just to mark for listeners that, while you have written a book called The Cult of Trump, I think that there are cults on all sides of the different political aisles, obviously to different degrees, and people are going to argue about that. But I want to mark that explicitly because I think one of the actual challenges of cult deprogramming is the belief that those who are being accused of being in a cult get very defensive, right? And just to name that no matter which group you might be a part of or which set of beliefs we might touch upon, try to come to this conversation, if you're a listener, with an open mind about really just studying what are the processes that have us go more and more extreme into a set of self-reinforcing beliefs and groups, and what would it take to kind of liberate us? So maybe, Steve, just to warm our listeners up for a bit to understand your personal story. Sure. And how you got recruited into the Moonies. Who were you back then, and what were the steps along the way that got you recruited? I know this is sort of setting the table for listeners, but...
My story is not that unusual, actually. I was victimized by a honey trap. I grew up in a very middle class Jewish household in Flushing, Queens. I was not a joiner. I was introverted. I wrote poetry and short stories. That was my major in college. I worked as a banquet waiter at a Holiday Inn in Hempstead while I was going to college to make my money. I was in the last draft lottery to go to the Vietnam War. So I was very disillusioned with what I had been taught growing up about, fighting communists. When I realized that this was an unjust war and that the government has been lying to us, I was like, I'm just not interested in wanting to make the world a better place. My girlfriend had dumped me abruptly over the Christmas break at college. I was an upper junior. I was blue starting the new semester. I was sitting in the cafeteria of Queens College, and three very attractive women asked if they could share my table with me and were flirting with me. And I was like, wow, sure, here, sit on down. And I had a whole pile of college textbooks that I had purchased for the next semester. I think I had Heidegger's Being in Time and a book on the Upanishads and a whole bunch of other for a philosophy course that I was taking. And they just asked me a billion questions, and I was so happy to tell them all about me. And I want to mark this part of my story, if I may, for your listeners, because back in the 70s, and I want to add, this was February of 1974, the whole idea of cults was not mainstream, at all. But back then, you needed to elicit information about people directly from them. So tell me about your family. What does your father do? Oh, he has a hardware store that he took over from his father. What does your mother do? Oh, she teaches art for 8th grade. Do you have siblings? Yes, I have 2 older sisters. So they elicited everything about who I was and what was important to me. These days, all of this data is now being collected online and is being used by agents, bad agents, good agents, whatever, to sell us products or to recruit us into cults. And if I may take one more minute, when I was a Mooney recruiter, and that's part of the story, is they recruited me into a front group through deception. But when I was a Mooney recruiter, I was told to sort people into thinkers, feelers, doers, or believers. And the idea was their lead thing. Like if someone says, I'm a strong Christian, I pray every day, there was going to be a different recruitment scenario developed for that person versus someone who's like, I'm an atheist, but I want to fix the world and help starving children. Different angle. But back to my cult story, if I may. So they asked me all this information. Then they were like, we would love to get to know you better. You're so special and you're so wonderful. What's known as love bombing, which online is called swarming, I believe. They were just love bombing me up, and I was lapping it up because, wow, attention from 3 attractive women. And I do remember asking them, are you students? Yes. Are you part of a religious group? No. Right. And I did. They looked me straight in the eye. And that's another thing I want to share with your listeners. My dad, who is a hardware store owner in Ozone Park, was like, Steve, you can always tell if someone's shady, they won't look you straight in the eyes. Like that was how I was inoculated by my dad.
Right. People in cults are actually very good at actually looking you directly in the eye
persuasively. And they were
persuasively.
very sincere. And I learned. And later, as I was helping people get out of Scientology, I learned they were actually drilling people to stare people in the eyes.
Wow.
And not blink, etc.
Well, actually, just to mark a few things, because I think it's nice to interactively kind of go back and forth and name some of the features of what pulled you in. Because the first thing I heard you say is that the Vietnam War is happening, and there's a disenchantment with government is part of that which preceded maybe going into something. Because I think there's some similar processes now, right? There's mass disenchantment with a lot of the systems that have run our society. That's one thing I heard you say. Another thing I heard you say is the affirmation and love bombing and lots of attention from attractive women. Just to make this concrete for listeners with social media, if I'm designing a social media product, the first thing I want to do when you enter is say, boom, you're so special. What your interests are really special to us. We're going to give you all of these things. In fact, we're going to show you the most attractive people on here when you first open that TikTok app. We're going to show you the most attractive, either men or women, just to sort of make some parallels for listeners. Then I'd love for you to keep going.
Yeah, attractiveness is important, but identification is even more important, that you're meeting people who are like you or people that you can really relate with. Right. And so as a recruiter, if we knew someone was like a disaffected Catholic from, the Bronx, and we had a disaffected Catholic from the Bronx, we would make sure to introduce them to each other.
Wall Street Journal did a great video about the TikTok algorithm that just, when you swipe a couple things, and it actually tests like, hey, is it the religious videos that work with you? Is it the dancer videos? Is it the soft porn videos for the, And it figures out which of these things work. And so just that matching, Steve, that you're talking about, of making sure that we have people who look like me, because the creature brain inside of us, I'm taking my neurolinguistic programming knowledge out here, the creature brain is saying, am I with like kind? Am I with people who look like me?
Yeah.
And that's what creates that trust.
What exactly is a cult? How do you define like undue influence? What differentiates like brainwashing versus persuasion versus mind control versus influence? Because I think it's easy to, I could imagine a question arising in our listener's mind, which is, okay, how is this not all relative? How is it not that there's a cult of the mainstream and then each one of these cults is like a different kind of right belief in their own right? How do you even know what a cult is? And I think if we can like go right to the heart of that question, that'll help the rest of this conversation land much more strongly.
Yeah, so I would like to start. I have what's called an influence continuum graphic, which is on my freedomofmind.com site. And it basically talks about ethical influence on one end of the continuum, the unethical influence. And so for me, there are cults that are on the ethical end and authoritarian cults that are on the unethical end. So when people say, ethical cults, what are you talking about? So for me, there are some behavioral criteria that helps flesh that out, and people can self-assess. And I refer to the four overlapping components as control of behavior, control of information, control of thoughts, and control of emotions. I refer to as the bite model of authoritarian control. And the more a group or person controls your behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make you over in their image or to have a pseudo identity that's obedient and dependent, that's my definition of an authoritarian cult, versus an ethical cult where you know what you're getting involved with, you have informed consent, you're encouraged to read whatever you want to read, talk to critics, talk to former members, challenge authority, and you're free to leave without phobias that have been put in your mind that you're going to get hit by a car or get cancer or be possessed by demons or go to hell or whatever. And so by having a frame based on human rights, based on, I'm an adult. These women who said they weren't part of a religious cult, but they were going back to the center, bowing to an altar with Moon and his wife's picture on it, reciting a pledge to die for the Moonies cult, that was a lie. These are the warning flags, because if something's legit, it will stand up to scrutiny. I say it over and over. The burden is on them to prove that they have this great thing, not on us to disprove it.
I actually would like to double click on each of those because, okay, if we're starting to define cults as the ability to influence behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. And if you're saying, Steve, that those are the critical ingredients, could you give some specific examples? And if you could, maybe to do it through stories that actually happened in the Moonies as you were getting recruited, because I think that would help ground people in what it means to be tapping into those things. So just to say one last thing, I think that if we can make a match to how social media is enabling the exact same manipulation on those four different axes that you're talking about, to even a more precise degree than you experienced or anyone experiences in a cult, I think we're starting to make the case that there is a mirroring and a matching and even an extension of a supercharging of those capacities.
Supercharging is absolutely the right word. And as your work has so ably demonstrated, we're needing to use ethics and wisdom to try to get a handle on this technology, because bad actors can use it for nefarious purposes and exploit people. Let's go back to the Moonies. So these women were flirting. They invited me over to meet their friends. I had a free dinner. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. There are people from all over the world that were sitting on the floor having, eating with our paper plates. And, okay, nothing here for me. Thanks, have a nice time. And I get my shoes on. I go out, it was snowing, to my car. And I don't know, a dozen people follow me out without jackets or shoes and surround my car. And I'm like in a confused state, which is a technique of mind control, right? If you want to mind control someone, confuse them. And how do you confuse people? You do incongruent behaviors that are not normal scripts for how humans interact with each other. So it makes the normal person curious, like, what is going on? I was surrounded and people were like, we like you so much. You have to promise to come back tomorrow. We want to get to know you better. And I'm like, it's cold. Go inside. Like, leave me alone. And they're like, no, we're not going to leave until you promise to come back. I'm serious. They actually
made
did
you
this.
promise to come back.
And I look back with 2020 hindsight, but they were so sincere and they were so nice. And there was someone from Harvard, there was someone from Princeton there. These were not dummies. These are interesting people. But I was an introvert. I was not into groups of any kind. So, but anyway, I promised to come back, and I'm a man of my word. And that came back to haunt me again, because after the second night, they were started with, we're going away this weekend. We're going to have a great time. We need you to come. And I'm like, I'm a banquet waiter. I work on the weekends. I've never had a weekend off for 2 years. Please stop asking me to come. I work. And they kept bugging me. And I said, okay, if I don't have to work some weekends, I'll go. And wouldn't you know, 2 days later, I call up my boss. Okay, when do you need me? He said, you won't believe it, but the wedding was called off. Take the weekend off. So this is a very important point I want to share with your listeners, because it turns out a lot of people get recruited into authoritarian cults because of some type of coincidence that just happens to mesh with what's happening in your life, and it's a misattribution of causality. Right. And it was like, in my back of my head, this was weird. I promised to go. I didn't want to go. My boss gave me the weekend off, but I gave my word. So I'm going to
So there's a commitment device. There's almost a superstitious, like, whoa, there's a coincidence here. Something is matching something else. There's a perfect timing, what they call kairos, of the exact match of when something comes at the time that you might want it.
Yes, and I hear this all the time with people that I've helped, where they were like, I was praying that morning for God to show me what I should do with my life, and knock, knock, the Jehovah's Witnesses, knocked on my door. So of course I let them in.
And social media can play on that as well, to talk about, just to make a mirror for our listeners in terms of the re-engagement paradigm. There you are, you're leaving your first night of dinner and you're like, okay, I'm done with this. But then they actually like love bomb you and kind of swarm you right as you're leaving. So now notice that, let's say you're on Facebook or Twitter and you started your account and you only engaged a few times with a couple tweets and then you stop using it. Well, what do? They just sit there and say, well, it was kind of nice to have Steve as a Twitter user for a day. We're just going to let him go. No, they get really aggressive. They start actually pounding you with, here's all this content you're going to miss. Here are these people that look like you. Oh, don't go. They'll literally use language with exclamation points saying, we're really sorry to miss you. We want you to come back. They 100%. Use that kind of language.
And it's not Facebook saying that. They put that in the coming from your friends. They'll show you faces of your friends that say, these people miss you. Come back.
So this is you're talking specifically about, if I go into Facebook and say I want to delete my account, as you go through that flow and it says, are you sure you want to delete your account? It'll put up the photos of 5 of the people you've clicked on the most. It calculates which faces of which friends can I put on this screen that are most likely to dissuade you from deleting your Facebook account. And they can calculate exactly which people. It would be like, hey, when you go out to when Steve is walking out to his car, which of these 5 people should we send to surround him? Should we send the Harvard people? Did he respond to them? Did he respond to appeals to authority and that credibility of the Harvard people? Or did he respond to those attractive girls? Or did he respond to, and so you can play with it, right? But now social media is doing that to a level of precision and degree that is totally different.
To answer your question about BITE, behavior, information, thought, and emotional control, I want to first just say I got this idea from Leon Festinger, who is a psychologist who wrote a book, Prophecy Fails. in the 50s, and he talked about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how humans want congruity or consistency amongst these three elements of our lives. We don't like dissonance. So we will start reformulating things. So if we are asked to do an extreme behavior, we'll rationalize it in order to feel good about it. For me, the misattribution effect, and maybe I'm meant to go for this weekend. Now I drive over to the Mooney house. They want me to go in their van. Big mistake. Should have had my own car. But way before cell phones were invented, right? And now I'm going to a place I have no idea what the destination is. I haven't told my family or anyone, where I am, other than I'm going off with some friends. Being driven into a multi-million-dollar estate in Tarrytown, and the guy at the front of the van says, "Oh, this weekend we're having a joint workshop with the Unification Church." To which I said, "Wait a minute. No one told me about a workshop. And what's this thing about a church? I'm Jewish." And then they did the classic cult mind control technique of turning it around on the person, that it's their fault. "What's the matter, Steve? Are you closed-minded? Do you have an issue with Christians?" All of a sudden now Steve's defensive and I'm confused. Because I thought I was going to have fun with these women and meet friends and have a great time for the weekend. And now all of a sudden it's a religious workshop, and they told me it wasn't religious. I said, "I want to leave. Drive me back."
Well, so actually, I think this is important to double click on as well, which is how our hesitations actually get weaponized as examples of our lack of belief of the very thing that the cult wants you to do. An example is in a Tony Robbins workshop. One of the experiences is you walk over these burning hot coals. And that's meant to show yourself that you are capable of something impossible. There you are. You're afraid of doing something as dangerous as that. But and there you see these huge flames. I mean, I actually did do it. And I think it was in Chicago. I did a workshop with Tony Robbins, and I was actually really afraid of doing it. Right? I mean, there are stories that people who have burned their feet walking on these burning hot coals. But of course, people do it thousands and thousands of times over, and there is a way in which it works, and it feels impossible. But if you hesitate, it's used as kind of well, isn't this how you're hesitating and not showing up bravely for your life? But what I hope we're going to be doing for listeners is showing how, whether we're talking about Tony Robbins or Landmark or Est or the Moonies or whatever, I mean, they exist in very different parts of the continuum, or coaching, or actual religions, or political tribes. There's these features of your hesitation is examples of something that you need to fix about yourself.
The power of certainty. Most people, until they've met a cult recruiter, have never experienced someone so confident and so certain that they know what they know with a capital K, what reality is and what's going on and what's best for you. And the average person has uncertainty. And so for me, whenever someone comes into my life who's super certain, I have warning, going off in my head, because I want people who aren't that certain and are willing to change their mind and detach their ego from their beliefs. Well, because I'm willing to change my beliefs if there's evidence that's convincing.
So when we criticize or name any groups here, right, there's going to be people who are going to be offended. Say, people who are believers of various religions, or you say Magistan or Wokistan. I mean, so everyone believes that they have the way, the one truth. And everyone believes that the other side, that we're awake, but it's the rest of the world that's not awake. I just saw that at the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, Ted Cruz was speaking, and behind him was a big poster that said, "Awake, not woke." So they're saying that we're the awake ones because woke is the bad thing. But then the woke people on the left believe that they're the ones who are actually awake to the actual history and the roots of oppression that we need to actually correct and fix. And then even the matrix is used on both sides, right? And the right has kind of currently co-opted the phrase red pilling In the film, The Social Dilemma, I said, how do you wake up from the matrix when you don't know you're in the matrix? If you're pro-vaccine, you're in a cult of not questioning whether the vaccine is actually safe. But if you're anti-vaccine, the people who are pro-vaccine say you're in a cult of questioning the validity of something that's saving lives. So everyone is very certain, and that's, I just to ground for listeners, the stakes of this conversation is why it's so important. Right. If we don't have ways of waking up from the certainty, one of the basic tools that you need of just recognizing, how would I know if I was wrong? Can I even, if I can't even send my mind there, that's probably proof that I'm captured by something.
Yeah, no, you're bringing up a really and critically important point, because ultimately the cure to blind faith is perspective. And developmentally, if you can't go a level up and look at both sides and the evidence for both sides and apply, how did I arrive at this information? You're going to be very vulnerable to being sucked into one side or the other, and come back to what are my values, what are my beliefs, and how do I want to live my life? Can I look in the mirror at night, feel good about myself?
Hey, Tristan Harris here again. Check out the second half of this episode on the Center for Humane Technology's YouTube channel, which is linked in the description below. And on our channel, we talk about radically reimagining today's technology and how we can catalyze a more humane future.